What really makes or breaks success in Japan? I'm Rie Sakurai, and in Bridging Borders Japan edition, I sit down with global leaders who have worked with inside Japanese business culture. Tune in and learn how to truly bridge borders. In episode 4, I'm excited to welcome Maya Matsuoka. Maya Matsuoka is a Tokyo-based corporate communications and cross-cultural consultant who helps international organizations navigate Japan's business environment with clarity and confidence. With a career spanning corporate communications, tourism, and stakeholder engagement, she has worked closely with Japanese companies, global partners, regulators, and customers, advising on mergers and acquisition, leadership transformation, reputation management, and Japanese customer expectations. She's the founder and the representative director of Japan Expert Insights, a platform and community dedicated to sharing practical experience-based knowledge about Japanese business culture. So Maya, thank you so much for accepting to do this interview first and joining us today. To start, I really want to get to know about you, and I think the audience is really excited to know about your background. My first question that came to my mind when I saw your LinkedIn profile, and I was so impressed about the channel that you have and also the career that you have been building. How did you come to Japan? And how were you interested in Japanese culture?
Right. Well, hello, and thank you very much for inviting me to the interview, Rie. And it's a pleasure to be here, of course. I'll try to share as much as I can. And to answer your first question, first of all, my name is once again Maya Matsuoka. It's a pleasure to be here with you. And I came to Japan in 2001. And when I came here, I had no interest in Japanese culture or working in Japan. Sorry to say this, but I came here because I met my husband back home in Bulgaria, where I am from, of course, and we worked on a couple of projects together. Then we dated for a year and we got married, and that's how I came to Japan. And before I came to Japan, I believed that since we were together and I was so young and very willing and very confident, I thought that I could deal with anything that came my way. Well, things turned to be a little bit more complicated than I imagined them to be, because after coming here, it was very difficult to find a job. I mean, I was very young. I didn't speak the language. That is on me. And of course, back then, 25 years ago, Japanese companies were not looking for young foreign women who had just been married and who didn't speak the language, of course. So it took me a while to find a job. And once I did, I had a lot of difficulty basically understanding why things happened the way they did. I imagined that everything would be very similar to the way things happened back home. Like I would try to find a job, I would start working for a company, and of course, start building a career here. And nothing like that happened, at least not during the first 6 years. So, yes, it
One
took
thing,
me.
when you came to Japan, you knew zero Japanese?
Yeah, I knew just a couple of words like konnichiwa and arigatou gozaimasu and domo and such things.
Yeah, that's like the words that I know in Polish now to survive in Poland.
But you're doing very well in Poland. I can see that.
Thanks to Polish people here. And I am also wondering, when you started look for jobs and then you didn't know Japanese at the very native level, how were their reactions at the interview? Like, how did you overcome this difficulty? Not knowing Japanese in Japan is such a difficult thing.
Well, I never got to see their reaction because what I did for the first 6 years was that I would send out resumes, and I would send the resumes. And the first 3 years, basically, of course, I worked part-time for different companies. And then finding a part-time job was not difficult back then, but I wanted something more substantial. I wanted to be full-time, a permanent employee, so that I could really contribute to the company's processes, development, and everything, right? And that didn't happen. So with those companies, I basically never saw their reaction because I never got to the point of being asked for an interview. So I sent out like maybe 10, 20, 30 resumes at once, and I never got a reply. So
Mm-hmm.
that's, I guess that for the people who were recruiting for those companies, it was incredulous. How could a foreigner, at that age who didn't speak Japanese and so on, apply for a position with us? Probably there was a surprise, I guess, and there was some, well, it's unbelievable or something like that, but I cannot speak on their behalf, of course. This is only what I can imagine their reaction was. So that's more or less it. But of course, I started studying Japanese right away. And I studied Japanese for the first 3 years I was here in Tokyo. Of course, because of the culture shock, I didn't remember many things. Most of the things were just lost on me. And then after the first 3 years, we moved to Sapporo. Again, I found a couple of part-time positions there, but I continued to study Japanese, and that's where I could get N2. Basically, I passed the exam, and a lot of things
Too.
started.
It's very
Yes.
hard even for Japanese people. I've seen textbooks myself.
Yeah, it was difficult because the way they teach Japanese is different from the way they teach you Indo-European languages back home, because I had studied French, I had studied English, I had studied Spanish, Russian, and so on. And the system they use to teach you these languages is very, more or less the same, regardless of the language. But here in Japan, the system is very different. And so it was really difficult for me to make sense of the grammar, first of all, and to make sense of the honorific expressions like keigo and kenjogo and everything, But eventually, somehow I managed. And then after we came back to Tokyo, after those 3 years in Sapporo, then I continued to study Japanese, and then I found a permanent position finally. Yes. And so I
And
also, yes.
you had the interview. Well, after you passed the interview, you came back from Sapporo. So you passed like the first phase of the resume phase.
Yes, I
What?
did. Yes, because I wrote all the resumes I wrote. I wrote them with my own handwriting, right? So all the
Right.
characters were mine. Maybe there were some mistakes, even though my husband back then he would check everything after I wrote it for me. And of course, I didn't want to send copies of the resume, right? So I wrote everything many, many times, and eventually I passed a couple of them, and I went to an interview. I passed the interview as well. But then the struggle continued because that's where I really, really hit the corporate culture here in Japan.
Mhm.
And it was, of course, it's interesting to me now when I look back because I suffered all the time. I couldn't understand why I was not allowed to work on a project by myself, right? I basically had to, even though I was the person in charge of the project, I couldn't work by myself. I had to get the buy-in by the manager, by my team members and everything, right? But that's how you build consensus here. I didn't understand that in the beginning because when I worked at home, back home, when I was responsible for a project, I would ask for help whenever I needed help, but otherwise I would be the leader there. And here in Japan, it's not like that. So basically, you don't ask for help when you need help. You start talking with the people on the team from the very beginning, and you decide what the problem is and what they see the problem, what the issue is for them and how they see it. And you try to find a consensus there so that everybody chimes in, right? Everybody gives advice, everybody offers their opinion and their expertise. And from there, you build on, right? And you find a solution that everybody thinks will work, right? And then from there, you move on towards the planning stage. And then once again, everybody's there and so on and so on. I didn't realize that in the beginning. So it was really difficult. And of course, almost every day after work, I would come back and I would be, why did this person do that? And why did the other person do this? And I would talk with my husband and he would learn to explain his own culture, his native
Mhm.
culture. because my husband is Japanese. It was, I would say that it was a mutually beneficial process. But I would say that I learned a lot about Japanese corporate culture without knowing the theory behind it. So it was through experience and trial and error. I listened a lot to what when I asked questions, people explained to me. And from there, basically, when I started feeling confident that I could navigate that corporate culture without making too many mistakes, I started learning the theory behind it, the explanations, basically,
Well,
of.
like you mentioned, the consensus is very important keyword when you try to understand the business culture. And every single time when you want to learn about business culture online or from someone's interview, it's always that keyword consensus is the key. And I want to go back a little bit about how you got the first permanent position. And I really want to know what were the first episode or struggles that you faced when the first day when you went to the company. Like, how was the atmosphere like, working in a Japanese corporate culture? I think the first thing you would see to understand is like the, 空気を読む culture, like
Yes.
the air, like did you go home at 6 p.m. exactly when the working hours ended? It's like, how was your first day look like?
Well, to me, it was a little bit different because with this reading the room or reading the air, as they say in Japanese, kuki o yomo, I didn't have that much trouble with it. And I didn't have that much trouble with it because back home in Bulgaria, we are also kind of a group-oriented society. Not
Really?
as much, yes, not as much as Japan, but also we've got that. And in addition to that, my upbringing, my mother was very strict. So I sometimes had to tiptoe around her, and guess what mood she was in. So I was not entirely new to the idea of reading the air. But what was really difficult to me was how sometimes people would ask me, and that happened actually during the first week. I don't remember the very first day, please forgive me for that, but I remember the very first week, they organized a welcome party for me. I don't remember, so words are just escaping me now, but there was that welcome party and we were sitting there and one of my new colleagues, who was maybe 15 years older than me, or maybe even more than that, he just said to me and said, Maya-san, how old are you?
Really?
Yes, and in front of everybody, And I was like, what is this? Because in the West, you never ask people
Right.
how old they are. And he was just right there in front of everybody. How old are you? And when I told him how old I was in my early 30s then. And he was like, you look like 10 years older than that. And I was like, what's this? Of course, I laughed. I laughed it off. I didn't want to go into a conflict mode at all. I thought, it was funny to a certain extent. And then after that welcome party, I came back home and I told my husband about the questions. And he said, oh, but this is a compliment.
Yeah.
Yes. And I'm like, how is this a compliment? You're telling a woman that she looks 10 years old and older than her age. And my husband said, well, this is a compliment because in Japan, if they tell you that you look older, it means that you look more mature. And this is a compliment. In Japan, you really have to be mature. And mature people basically are seen as people who can, who are more consistent in their behavior, who do not, how can I say, present surprises with their behavior to their in-group members, right? And this is very highly valued because Japan, even in corporate culture, even more so, people value predictability, right?
Yes.
And then when you're mature, you're more predictable because people know that they can rely on you. Now I see that, well, that was really compliment, right? But when the person said, oh, you look 10 years older, and I was like, oh, wow.
And at that time, how old were you actually?
I was 34.
I see. And then from your point of view, did you look like 10 years older than 34?
Well, I hoped I didn't. I hoped I didn't, right? So it was really strange to me because
Yeah.
Oh, wow, wow, wow. Of course, when I came back home, I looked at myself in the mirror and I tried to, to see why or how I looked older
I
than
can't
that.
imagine experiencing that in Europe. Like, imagine you saying that to someone, you look like 10 years older, and then European people are like, excuse me, you know? Yeah, that is very Japanese specific thing that you'd get surprised, I think.
Yes, but it also worked, and it's important when basically I hear this at every birthday I have here from my mother in law. She very intentionally says, Maya, いくつになったの? Every year. It's not that she forgets, but she's joking because she knows that back in Europe, we don't do that. And she's joking because she has that character. I love her character. She's a wonderful woman. But the point is about asking the age. It happens quite often in corporate settings. The thing is that people don't want to be offensive. They don't mean that. The thing is that Japan, the Japanese society, and then also the Japanese corporate organizations are still very hierarchical. And age very often means when they know their age, they can understand where you stand in that hierarchy. And then it also defines the way they relate to you, the way they address you. It also defines how they communicate with you, and whether they are above you, where they're at the same level as you, or whether they're kohai, right? Whether they're subordinates, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of implications in having that conversation. And usually that conversation in Japan is had not to be or not to offend the person who is asked how old they are. It is to clarify, the standing of that person within the hierarchy. So I believe that it's very important to understand that and not take such questions as offensive.
Yeah,
So
this is a very good information to know in advance, because then some like a reaction like you back then would happen. For Japanese, it's very normal for us to ask the age. And when I was in Europe at the beginning, I did ask a few people like, "How old are you?" to Europeans, like
yeah,
normally, and then they're like, no, age doesn't matter in Europe. And I was like,
exactly.
okay, that's just maybe Asian thing, also specifically Japanese culture, that determines the way we speak, like using keigo
Yeah.
honorifics, how we talk to older people and the younger people. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you about a little bit before that you mentioned that it's not good to ask for help. And can you share us like the episode that you've learned that like asking for help was not a good way to start with?
I wouldn't say it's not a good way. In Japan, basically, it's not what I wanted to say is that when you work in a team in Japan, you don't communicate with your teammates only when you need help. You communicate with them all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yes,
asking questions uh, is o- is recommended, right?
yes, it is recommended. And usually those questions, they are not asked at meetings. So when so many people are there, because when you're in a meeting, well, basically the whole division is there and the whole hierarchical structure is there. The bucho, who is the director of the division, and then the fukubucho, who is the deputy director. And you have the project leaders and the team leaders and this and that, right? So it's once again in such a meeting, you have to be very careful what questions you ask, to whom you ask them, because sometimes if you're too direct, you may damage the face of some of your superiors. So what happens, and the best practice I have found is that you basically, if you have questions, you go around and ask per people one by one. So
Yeah,
that
before the meetings.
before the meetings, of course. And when you do that, you're very safe because in Japan, you don't want to put pressure on people when you ask them about different things in front of others, right? So there's a caveat here, of course. If you are at a nomikai, those are the social meetings after working hours. If you go there as a team and if you have a drink or two or three, then you can ask any questions you want, because that's a different setting. You have the permission. Everybody has the permission to ask questions there. It's unspoken permission. But during meetings, you really have to be very careful. So there is a very fine and very, let's say, complex dynamic in corporations, in companies, and you always have to be aware of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting topic to talk about now, especially because among Gen Zs, they started not to drink alcohol. They started to hate going to nomikai. And I was talking with my friends who work at Japanese companies now, the same age as me, 28. And some people love going to these nomikai because they can bond with their managers, but some people hate it because they don't even have, it's a place to like listen to their manager's legendary, I don't know, episodes, like how they got successful,
Yes.
like I think there are types of good nomikai and a bad nomikai. Do you think it's like a bad to not to go to these nomikais that Gen Zs are started to hesitate? If they don't go to nomikais, where do they have opportunity to ask, these questions that you cannot talk about it during at work or during business meetings?
Yeah. So that's a question that is, well, it requires, once again, a little bit of a long answer, because I would say it's always better. If you're invited, it's always better to go. You don't have to drink alcohol. That's another thing, because if you say, I will have just oolong cha, which is oolong tea, you're perfectly fine with that. And you don't have to get drunk, and nobody will force you to drink alcohol. That's the first thing. But if you don't like to listen to your bucho's heroic stories and you don't want to go there, so the other way of getting, that communication and bonding with them, your colleagues, basically, is through lunches or in the tea room.
Mm,
Because many corporations in Japan, many companies, they do have the ochashitsu.
mm-hmm.
And that is basically, that's where everybody goes to get hot water for tea, or where the coffee machine is, where people can get a cup of coffee, right? And at the company which I worked for until recently, there was that tea room, right? And many times people would go there and they would spend like maybe 5 minutes with anybody else who comes, and they'll exchange a couple of words in the beginning, but gradually, as days go on and they meet there more often, they would start talking about other things, about work as well. And so that's another way. And lunches, once again, when you work there, you can invite your colleagues or a colleague to lunch, and people are usually happy. Of course, sometimes you have to coordinate that because many people take their lunch boxes to work, right? And you have to plan in advance and maybe just book a lunch with that person next week, and tell them, okay, let's have lunch. So please don't bring, and you don't have to say this, don't bring your lunchbox. They know that already. But yeah, definitely you can do that over lunch as well. With the bucho, it's a little bit more complicated because it's difficult to invite the director to lunch, right? So,
Right.
but if they happen to invite you, then by all means, say yes and go to that lunch. So,
Sharing that, I think that's very practical advice, and anyone can start doing that from today. If people don't want to go to nomikai or don't want to drink alcohol or just want to keep work and private life separate, they can take time during lunch or tea time break. Thank you for sharing that. And the next thing I want to move on to talk about is about your specialties. Like after experiencing coming to Japan without knowing Japanese, studying hard Japanese, to the point that you got a permanent position and then you started understanding corporate culture. How did you build your specialties that, for example, on LinkedIn, you mentioned mergers and acquisition, leadership and management transformation, stakeholder communication, reputation management, and lastly, Japanese customer service and client expectations to be specialized in these areas? I am sure you have gone through another difficult process of understanding these areas deeply.
Well, it happened over time. It didn't happen overnight, of course. And in the beginning, as I mentioned, I worked part-time for different companies in the IT industry, also in the education industry. I worked in the outbound travel industry as well, and also later in the consulting industry. So it has been I've got this very diverse background. But every time, the thing that really was so obvious to me was that the most important thing that people very seldom recognize is the culture. And the differences in culture are basically the ones that make or break a deal. And in my positions, most of the time I worked with non-Japanese partners and non-Japanese stakeholders. So even though I worked for Japanese organizations and I had to represent their interests, right, and their ways of doing things, I had to also work with those foreign governments, national tourism organizations, also with foreign companies, private entities, right, that wanted to come to Japan. They wanted to work here, to establish their offices and everything. We didn't do the legal stuff for them, but we provided consulting services about the market. About customer expectations, how they could basically communicate with other stakeholders in Japan. And many, many times, those foreigners, they would say, but it doesn't make any sense.
How did you explain that further? That is the hard part.
Yes, this is the hard part. And then from there, I started learning about why the Japanese business culture, the Japanese corporate culture is different. And why, for example, many people would say it's very slow. We want to start, in 3 months. We want to be here in the market and to start selling our products in 6 months. And that's not possible when you come as a newcomer to Japan, because first of all, you have to establish a rapport with relative stakeholders, partners or future partners. You have to also, in order to establish after you establish that rapport, you have to build trust. And building trust in Japan takes much longer than it takes anywhere else. And you may be like a foreign company, you may be absolutely confident in the quality of your product and everything because it has worked in the United States. It has been accepted very well in France. It has been a bestseller in Germany. But then when it comes to Japan and you want to sell it here, it turns out that the Japanese market expects slightly other things, right?
Yeah, I know
And
what you
and
mean.
then communication with the Japanese partners, stakeholders, with the customers is different. So, of course, I started studying about that. Why? And it took me a while to do that, but eventually things became clear step by step. I talked also with my colleagues. I talked with my husband, who is also, once again, he learned a lot. He learned how to explain his own culture as well. So I also learned how to explain why things are like that. And when you think about, for example, why the Japanese decision making is so slow, because it feels slow, right? We cannot say that it isn't. But there is a reason. The reason for it being so slow is that eventually everybody who is going to work on the project has to say yes and has to agree that this is the way to go forward. And it takes time to get the okay by every member of the team. But at the end of the day, when buy in, everything goes so fast, right? Very speedy. And then people don't realize that. Foreigners don't realize that
Mm.
once everybody is on board, things happen very quickly. And I have come to believe that at the end of the day, the Japanese way of decision making is much more effective. It may not be efficient, but it's much more effective in terms of execution than the Western way of that. And also, many people, again, I go back to the cultural reasons for that. I like to give the example of, we've got this, imagine a computer, right? You have your computer, and then you've got the hardware. You've got the latest model of either, Microsoft or Apple or whatever. And then your computer is perfect, and now you have to install the software. And you install the software, you think that it is going to work, but suddenly it doesn't. So,
That's a very
right?
good example. Yeah.
Yes. And the software is the culture.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
If your culture doesn't work, if there is no alignment, if you don't understand how the software works, and if it doesn't work, then nothing happens. Your perfect operations, your systems, your strategy for working in Japan and developing your Japanese operations, everything goes downhill because your software doesn't work.
That is very good way to say about the how Japanese culture would not be in alignment. Where exactly would you say this, differences in culture really come to an important step? For example, foreign national comes to Japan for a business meeting with Japanese companies, let's say a manufacturer company. They have they already prepared a list of partners or distributors that they want to work with in Japan to export their stuff. They come to Japan and they meet the Japanese people there. What would you say what happens if there is no one in between when they meet Japanese partners to do business?
Well, it can be a very long answer, but I'll try to give you just a couple of points, not all the points, of course, because
Yeah.
yeah. First of all, of course, many companies come to Japan and they think that they are prepared. They think they do, of course, a little bit of studying about, Japan. Decision making is so slow, but we are prepared to wait. Maybe it will take 3 months, but that's not the thing. So you do have to work. You do have to have somebody who is between you and the Japanese, the prospective partners, because then that person can align your expectations and their expectations and probably basically manage those expectations, because the two sides have very different expectations. They prioritize things differently. And when I talk about how, for example, Westerners and Japanese prioritize things, it is the Japanese, they prioritize effectiveness, and then Westerners prioritize efficiency. So that's efficient use of time. If they have come to Japan for 1 week, they want to have 10 meetings, and they want to know that they will take some good results home. But for the Japanese, that's not the case, because they want the meetings to be effective, not efficient. And effective means that first of all, they want to make sure that they can rely to the company that has come to Japan. And relying on that company means that the company also has to prove that it can answer all the questions, it can meet all the concerns of the Japanese company, because that Japanese company produces products for example, for the Japanese market. And the specifications of the products, they need a lot of details about those specifications and so on. And it starts like that. So, right, the two sides are expecting different things from the one and the same meeting, and it doesn't happen. So you have to try to narrow that expectation gap first thing of all. But of course, you have to tell, for example, your Western company, it could be a German company, it could be an American company, that when they present their case, they do need to offer a lot of details in the presentation, right? Because back home, it's the same thing in Bulgaria as well. We love our bullet points.
Yeah.
Oh, it's really the fewer bullet points there are on a slide, the better the presentation is. And then the Japanese love their context. The more context there is on the slide, the better it is, right? And so the Japanese slides, they look like a very finely written or overloaded page of,
Yeah.
I don't know how to say it, right? So, and if you want, since you want them, the Japanese company, to be your partner, you have to convince them to be your partner. You have to adjust to their expectations. So don't just come with bullet points, right? Come with details so
Yeah,
that,
that is a lot of like the episodes that I hear from people, especially American companies, love, giving visions instead of giving details. So, like you said, giving like a few bullet points on one slide, and then the next slide is like just visual, like one picture, and then the Japanese companies would be asking so much detail in
yes.
after all. Yeah, like it's a very good example, and I see that a lot even these days.
Yeah, and also after those meetings, when you go back home, and if your presentation has been accepted and thought that, well, maybe there is some potential there, and they start asking you questions again, then don't wait to respond to those questions. Whenever possible, respond on the same day. Right? So send the reply on the same day. If you don't have all the answers, still acknowledge the email and tell them, thank you very much for the email. We received it. Please give us a little bit of time to, to put all the details together, and then we'll be back to you. But don't leave the email unanswered for days on end.
So let's say a very failed example. Foreign national comes to Japan thinking prepared for the meeting. They come with PowerPoint presentations with just, let's say, 3 bullet points for each slide. And then they don't bring any supporting documents with them. And then they're not able to answer any of the questions at the meeting, or they don't even answer the emails on the day from the Japanese companies. That would be a very good example how to fail, right?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes. But I would say that if you come only with bullet points, you're never going to get to the email stage. So, yeah.
Okay, then on the flip side, the very successful way, let's say, would be foreign nationals or foreign companies come to Japan prepared is, I can't really imagine like the English slides as detailed as the Japanese slides, but at least be ready for any of the questions that would arise from the Japanese companies in detail. And that would lead to the trust from Japanese companies. Would you say that right?
Yes, very much so. If you have any technical specifications of what you want to offer as a product or even the project itself, that's put in the, let's say, format of a PDF file, could be a brochure. Bring everything here and just give it to your potential partners, right? So that you also allow them to think about it, to review what you have prepared, and allow them the time to think about it, because without it, it's just no, it's not going to work. Really, you
Mm.
will never get a chance to fail at the email stage.
Right.
That's
And I want to recall our conversation when we talked about having an interview today, that you talked about an example where there was a business meeting between Japanese company and a foreign company. And then you were there at the business meeting with them. And I think that was the very successful model of why an intermediary is needed when they have business meetings, or when foreign companies want to do business with Japanese companies. Would you be able to talk about it from the beginning?
Yes, well, it was a client, an American client, and we went to several of their a client for me, basically, but they had been working with Japan for maybe 12 years already. And we went to several meetings, and they went very well, of course. But those meetings, most of them were basically a way to show that we are here. We still value you enough so that the four of us, the team, came to Japan to meet you this year once again. And we are here for you if you have any questions or if you want us to provide any more details and so on. So that was the whole idea behind the business trip of my client. But then at the last meeting, what happened was that that partner of theirs started talking about a project, a new project. And so I was taking notes. Of course, I was taking notes of the meetings, and I was taking notes of everything that was said in English and that was said in Japanese. And then at the end, of course, the Japanese partner said, we want to use your materials, the specific materials, for a new product that we're planning to start producing from April next year. And of course, I put that down as well. There was no reaction on the side of my client at that point of time. And of course, later, when I wrote the minutes, I sent them the minutes of all the meetings, but this was the most important one in my view, because basically the Japanese partner spoke about a new project. It came from them, right? So, and I sent the minutes, and my American partner said, "Oh, really? I didn't notice that." And so what happened next? They basically communicated via email. I was included in the communication, of course. You see it there, and they sent an email to their Japanese partner with that very specific question. Okay, so what do you think about our this material, and then are you interested in working with it? And the Japanese company immediately replied and said, yes, we are currently talking about this. We have internal discussions, and we want to meet you in the United States next time our team goes there, and we want to continue the talks so that we can move towards production from April on. So, and I thought, how was it possible for my client to miss that, right? But obviously, it happens. And I believe that the reason for that was there were a couple of reasons, of course, because there was a strong accent. So the meeting was in English, right? But sometimes Japanese English speakers have a very strong accent, and it is easy to miss things. Another thing is, of course, that I also listened to the Japanese side when they repeated that in Japanese among themselves, right? They once again, towards the end of the meeting, they repeated that in Japanese. So for me, that was basically confirmation on their side. But the other thing is also that my clients, they were probably tired, right? Because of the jet lag and all the meetings. It was an exhausting program here in Japan. And we traveled from one part of Japan, from north to south, and then from south to north once again. That's another very, very trivial but very valid reason for people to sometimes miss important points. So it's, of course, you need to have somebody here on the ground who knows how communication happens, and to hear what they say in Japanese as well, not only in English, because sometimes what they say in Japanese is not being translated.
Right.
That's the thing, right? And
And
yeah.
also, like these days, we can use AI to, transcript, summarize meetings. But like, if you use the AI tool to record this meeting and let it summarize, I don't think it would highlight it to like, look, this is the important point that you need to talk about. The AI would just simply summarize what the meeting was about, but sometimes not in detail.
Indeed. Well, that's very true. That's why you need somebody who can do that for you. And usually the human brain is better because we already have knowledge, our brains, and we as let's say facilitators, we have knowledge of the goals that that both sides or our customers have. And that context is very important.
Right, right. Yeah, thank you for sharing this episode. I think a lot of people think AI can replace this kind of cultural interpreter position. but to still this day, I myself, I'm struggling to be in the between the Japanese company and the foreign company to work on a project. So yeah, sharing this episode was necessary for the audience to understand like why a person who deeply understand the Japanese culture and also Western culture is still needed nowadays. So thank you so much for that.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. I want to ask this question that I ask to every the person that I interview. So, if a foreign company wants to move their business to Japan, or they are thinking to start business in Japan by setting up companies or start exporting their products to Japan and sell products, what would you say would be the first advice that you would give to them, knowing the difficulties of understanding and adopting Japanese culture?
Yeah, such companies already know that the Japanese culture is different. Many people say that it is unique, and to a certain extent, it is, just like any other culture, right? It's very specific in certain ways. And since everybody knows that already, I want to tell them that everything starts and ends with people. And when you work with people, try to build rapport and also try to find common ground, first of all. Because when you find common ground, then it's much easier to build upon that and work forward. When we find similarities, then we get better motivated to work together and to understand each other together, because we already know that there are differences. Don't think only about the differences, find the similarities, and from there move forward and be very patient. Try to understand the why behind everything that happens. And there is always a logical explanation. There is always a reason why things happen in this certain way. If you understand that, then you'll be fine.
Yeah, thank you so much for summarizing the answer. That was a very difficult question, I think. But every foreign company, for example, that ask me for support when entering the Japanese market now, see that they know that patience is the key, but then let's say many companies think 1 year is enough. And for example, let's say they want to sell a product in Japan. They think they can sell that product like in a month. But then in reality, that's not true, because when you want to sell a product in Japan, for example, you want to sell it on Amazon or Rakuten, you need some certain specifications that you need to request to the government to prove that your product is legit, let's say for medical devices or even
Oh,
toys.
yeah.
And a lot of foreign companies think this whole process would be, finished at least 1 year is the longest. But then I think for me, that how a lot of people say 3 years is the standard length of how you want to understand whether you can succeed in the Japanese market or not. 1 year uh, is a is very short for me.
It is, yes.
Sell your products or be successful in expanding to the Japanese market. So you saying patience is the key was another validation for the audience to know that patience is really important in the Japanese market.
Yes, absolutely. And I believe that many people say, yeah, I can be patient, just as you mentioned 2 minutes ago. But when they say patient, they think about 1 year, being patient for 1 year. And that's not the case. You have to be 3 times more patient than you can be patient in any other country in the West. And since you mentioned medical products, here you do need special government permits to be able to sell in Japan, and many other actually agricultural produce does also needs government permits, and anything also cybersecurity products, they do need government permits as well, and it takes time. And from there, it's not just the permit, because you also have to work with stakeholders stakeholders here in Japan, and working with those also requires time. And even though those things they can go parallelly in time simultaneously, 1 year is not enough. That's how it is.
When you had to explain this, patience is the key to your clients, how did you convince or like made them understand? Like, did you present the documents like this is what you need, and this is the process that you need to go through, which takes this much time? Was it the kind of process that you needed to explain to them?
Yes, so I usually give them examples with other clients, real life examples. And some of the clients, they say, yes, I understand. And they move forward and they say I understand, but on the way they become impatient again, which is inevitable. But once at the point they become impatient, it's already too late to give up because a lot has been invested. So they have the only option of moving forward and completing the processes and so on. And of course, some companies say, yeah, it's just not worth the time and the effort. So we'll try another market and not the Japanese. And that's okay too. Because just like with people, corporations, not every corporation needs to be in Japan. If they cannot provide cultural fit with their products or for their products to the market, the Japanese expectations and everything, they just don't have to waste all the resources of trying to come to Japan.
Mhm.
So,
A lot of people ask me this question that I want to talk lastly is what is the advantages of expanding their business to Japan? And the first thing that I always say is that once you go through this, hard process that you need patience, and then you succeed in the Japanese market, you can have loyal customers and that would last very long. From your experience looking at both companies that gave up on the Japanese market and also continued to be in the Japanese market, how would you say from your perspective, like the benefits and advantages of expanding their business to Japan?
yes, there are several. I'll mention just one or two of them though. The first one, as you said, once you have your customers in Japan, if you don't fail miserably, and it's difficult to fail here, if you have people on the ground who know how the market works, it's difficult to fail. So if you don't fail, then you are here for life. That's the beauty of the relationships of course, with your customers, with your stakeholders and everything. The other thing is that because the Japanese market is very demanding, Japanese customers, they don't require, they expect quality. They expect consistency in quality. And they expect you to be able to solve different issues if such issues arise. Because in Japan, failure is not so important as is your ability to fix it, right? To deal with it in a very consistent way. And so, if you can do that, basically you acquire know-how, which can help you develop products and businesses and enter other markets in the world. But the Japanese developing this know-how here in Japan will basically open doors in other markets for your company.
That's very good information. A lot of companies wanting to expand to Japan. It's not only Japan, usually, it's Singapore, Indonesia, Vietnam, and South Korea, China, of course. So that is the key information for the audience, I think. Thank you so much for sharing your story and episodes. And last of all, thank you so much for joining me today. And I think the audience really appreciated your episodes and the stories. I would like to conclude this podcast saying that thank you so much for the audience to keep listening. And we will continue the conversations with more guests coming up. If you want to ask more questions, if you want to talk with Maya. Maya is reachable on LinkedIn. Would you give other contacts
Yeah.
for us that we can put in the YouTube descriptions?
Yes, we've got a website which is Japan Expert Insights. If you type that, you'll go to the website. You can also email us from there, or you can reach me on LinkedIn, of course, and we can communicate there as well because there is a direct messaging function, and Ria and I we have communicated there as well. So that's the fastest thing, I believe. And I believe you can find me on Facebook as well. We can communicate on Messenger as well. I'll be happy to communicate with anybody, to connect with anybody who is interested in learning more about how corporations work here, about Japan, the Japanese business landscape. And if you need help, let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much. We will put down all the descriptions and details about Maya. So if you're interested, please reach her out. I myself support foreign companies, form companies in Japan. Also, we do digital marketing support such as SEO, search engine optimization, or content consulting if you need a spot on support. So do reach us out. And thank you again so much for
Thank you.
joining us today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Me too. Thank you.